Hey guys, how are ya? Welcome back to my channel. It's me, Steven. I'm on a long layover here in San Diego, and I'm feeling very, I was going to say relaxed, but I'm feeling very over full. I'm actually having a hard time taking a breath because I ate so much for dinner. I had like 18 servings of chicken enchiladas. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but not much. I'm afraid it might be disastrous later on, but I'll worry about that later. So today is January 10th. Now, if you know me and my story, you might remember what today is. If you don't, that's okay too. But today, January 10th, is my 4-year anniversary of going to my hiring event for my job as a flight attendant. And I'll tell you, I mean, I'm so grateful. Every day I'm grateful, but today is a very, very special day for me. Yeah, so what I figured I would do is do a little video about talking, a little story time about what life was like for me at that time, what I was going through, what the hiring event was kind of like in a rough way, and how this all came about. And yeah, so settle in. I don't think this will be a very long video, but yeah, I know I talk. So let's go back in the Wayback Machine to December of 2016. My friend Steven, who lives in a very fancy house in Buckhead, part of Atlanta, invited me up to Atlanta for Christmas. Now, at the time, I was very sexy, living in a 2004, I think, Ford Freestar minivan in Tampa. Yeah. Ooh, those enchiladas. But yeah, I was living in a minivan in around Tampa, and for the most part, I found safe places to sleep were oftentimes like a Planet Fitness parking lot because there wasn't really a lot of security, and they're all over the place, so I could kind of switch it up. And then I just go into the gym, shower, shave, do my thing, work out. I was never in better shape, and then go to work. So it was a really great place to sleep. Sometimes I would try sleeping in a Walmart parking lot, depending on what part of town I was in. But they often have security, and in Florida, they really don't take people sleeping in their parking lots very lightly. So it was often Planet Fitness. But my friend Steven invited me up to Atlanta for Christmas. We actually drove up to his second home in the tops of the Smoky Mountains. And I'll tell you, there was just no more beautiful place. I'll tell you, just gorgeous. Around near Almond, North Carolina. I don't know where that is, but we went way up at the top of the mountains, and he has a house up there, just with a balcony that just literally looks over the clouds. Oh, it was magnificent. But we were up there for Christmas, and we drove back to Atlanta, and I think I spent New Year's there, but Stephen knew my situation. And he has this giant house in Buckhead with just him and our friend Phil living there and 2 small little puppies. And so he invited me really to kind of move in there because there had to be better job opportunities in Atlanta than there were in Tampa, and there are no truer words spoken. So I very gratefully accepted, and while I was there, before I went down to Florida to collect my things, the things that were kind of scattered around in friends' houses and stuff like that, excuse me, I had started applying for different jobs. Now, mind you, I never really wanted to be a flight attendant. I was kind of afraid to fly. I know. I never really wanted to be a flight attendant. What I really wanted to do was go back into what I had always done, which is luxury retail. Well, always for quite a long time. So I applied for pretty much any luxury position in Atlanta, and there are quite a few. So I applied to all the fancy hotels. I applied at Neiman's, I applied at Saks, and Neiman's was going to offer me, they offered me a position in evening gowns, evening dresses, but it was just a really rotten position because that department is just thumbs down. They wanted to offer me like $10 an hour plus commission, but whatever. It was just, it would have been bare survival in that department. And then instead I got a job offer at Saks in their fine jewelry department, which is what I had been doing in Boston. So I stepped out of that interview where they offered me a position at Saks in fine jewelry. And it was probably the most lucrative department in a very lucrative store in the country, really. And I walked out and I remember standing on the sidewalk thinking, oh, I really should be thrilled. I should be excited that I have this opportunity. But, once again, I'm going to be working behind a counter in a department store with people who really don't care about me. I'm living in a room in someone else's house, which is what I was doing in Boston. And I'm just not going anywhere. This is just my life, and I didn't want to do it again, but I didn't have any options. So I was just preparing to go back up to Steven's house and then prepare to go back down to Florida to collect my things. And then I looked at my phone and there was an email from my airline. I almost said the airline's name. So I received an email from my airline because I had applied. Let me go back a bit. I had applied to Delta because it's Atlanta, right? And my friend Steven's like, well, if you really want to be a flight attendant, you should apply to other airlines. And I'm like, I really don't want to be a flight attendant, but I need a job. And Delta's kind of prestigious, right? So it was in line with my experience in customer service. And so I thought, well, I'll apply at Delta. But for some reason, I listened to Steven. And so I applied. I'm going back into the story, so I'm ruining the surprise. So I applied at Delta, and I applied at American, I applied at JetBlue, I applied at my airline, who I had never heard of before. I had never heard of them before, and I was Googling airlines and just applying. And so I applied at a few airlines. And there I am standing outside of Saks wearing a suit, thinking, ugh, my life. I'm gonna do the same thing I did for years. Ugh. Poor me, right? And that's when I got the email from my airline saying, hi, we'd like to learn more about you after seeing my application. And I think I did the online questionnaire. There's like 100 questions that you have to answer. Kind of like a Cosmo quiz, but for an airline. So I passed whatever online things there were, and they were offering me an invitation to the hiring event. And so I decided I have to decide whether I go to this hiring event for a career that I really am not interested in, where I'm actually going to be afraid to actually fly because I was a nervous flyer, you could say, or do what I've been doing for years, which is sell expensive jewelry and just plod along the same course, And so I decided I would lie to the people at Saks, and I told them I had a huge family emergency that required me to go away for a couple of weeks and take care of my father, who, if you know me, is not part of my life. I wanted to have some sort of emotional foot in the door, so if I had to come back to accept that job offer, I could. I certainly hope no one at Saks is watching, but who cares? I'm never going there anyway. So I went back down to Florida, to Fort Lauderdale, where the hiring event was. Now, mind you, I'm homeless, living in a minivan. So it was actually quite convenient. I drove down to Fort Lauderdale, found a Planet Fitness near the hiring event, had my clothes, my suit and everything all pressed and hanging on the, inside the car. That morning, I went to the gym around 4:30 in the morning, shaved, showered, did my thing, got dressed, and went over to the hiring event. And I'm sure I'm probably missing something along the way, but went to the hiring event. And I think I've talked about my hiring event experience a couple of years ago when I first started my channel, but roughly, I'll tell you, there were probably 550 people at the hiring event. That's how we roll. When we send out invitations, I think we send out more invitations than we think we're going to need, because some people just choose not to show up at our event because, we're not Delta. But like 550 people showed up for the hiring event, and they're all young, they're all pretty, they're all shiny, and they're all like prepared, and they're all look like flight attendants. And here I am. I was 47 at the time. I turned 48 in training. I was 47 years old. I looked, well, like this, but I had a full beard. And I was wearing a navy suit with white pinstripes, a white shirt, a red tie. I had a very distinguished looking beard, and I was old. And I felt very uncomfortable. And I just knew that I was not the person they wanted. I just knew. They wanted young, pretty, fresh, vibrant, energetic. They didn't want me, right? So, roughly, and I won't describe the whole process in detail, but at the hiring event, there was an hour-long sort of orientation, and I won't ruin the surprise if you go. There's actually dancing. People are encouraged to kind of dance, and there's music playing, and the airline personnel and employees, many of which are flight attendants, come in dancing, and then they do a presentation in terms of how little money you're actually going to make. That they told us right away in the orientation how much money to expect to make, so you could walk out of the room right then and there if you thought you couldn't survive on that. But they talked a lot about the company and um, uh, its background, its culture, and I was like, huh, well, maybe I do want this job. And then we had to break up into different rooms based on codes or color codes on our name badges. And something called a goldfish bowl question happened. I was not prepared for this, but thankfully, I'm middle-aged. I have survived many interviews, so I did fairly well. I got the job. But if you are going to ever apply for my airline and you are curious about the hiring event and what it's like, go and do a YouTube search after you watch this video about something called the goldfish bowl question. I'm probably the only video that pops up if you do a search. Boy, those enchiladas are sitting right here. But don't go do a search for a video called the goldfish bowl question, and I go in extreme detail. Apparently, it's a very long video about what that process is like. Now, I was asked a question. I had to pull a question out of a bowl. I told you more about that in that video. The question I got was, what do you do on your free time? I got the easiest question in the world. But if you were to go if someone else were to ask you right now, what do you do in your free time? I think many of us struggle. Gee, what are my hobbies? What do I actually like to do? What's my favorite color? Who knows? I happen to have an answer right away because I'm a potter. I would love to be a full-time potter. It's not going to happen. A potter, if you don't know, is someone who works with clay, an artist who works with clay. For me, it was on a wheel. I throw on the wheel. Some people do hand building. But I said, I'm a potter. I work with clay. I said, if you don't know what a potter is, I said, think of the movie Ghost without the dead people. And people laughed. And, I typically have a very similar personality as you meet in my channel in person when I'm in a microphone. It's the same, I'm the same person. So I was pretty likable, I guess, and easy going. And it was fun. I had a good time. The whole day was relatively fun, just very long. Because after that goldfish bowl question, we were broken up. We had to go back to our rooms, and then they would call different numbers. And you could see by how people were dressed or how they were behaving, you could see right away that the people who were being called were not going to be receiving a job offer. One of the guys who was standing behind me in line for registration, he had this amazing haircut. It was very trim on the sides and kind of high up on top. And it was just beautiful. It wasn't a mohawk or anything, but it was gorgeous, and it was struck with white. Gorgeous hair. But he's wearing a blue chambray shirt with a pair of khaki trousers with this belt that had these big silver concha things all around them, and he's wearing a pair of like lizard cowboy boots. And at that time, we were in line for registration. I think I said something like, "Are you in line for breakfast? Are you looking for the?" I wasn't trying to be catty. It just came out that way. I was like, "Are you looking for the breakfast line?" He's like, "No, I'm interviewing. I was here last year, but they didn't give me a job offer." He didn't think that he was memorable. Well, he will always be memorable to me, but they called his number, and they called a woman who was wearing this like tattoo tutu, this like crinoline tattoo with a leather thing on top of it, and this big Diana Ross hair. But they called her name, and I looked at these people and I was like, please don't call my number. Please don't call my number. Please don't call my number. My number was 33. They called 31, 32, and in my heart, I'm like, please don't call my number. Because I wanted this job. After meeting the people I had met and seeing the people at the event, I wanted this job. I did not want to go back to selling jewelry at Saks Fifth Avenue. I didn't want to go back to that life. And they didn't call my number. And so we went to emotional. We went to a waiting room. It was the decision room. Now that I've been a part of the hiring process, because I'm a brand ambassador, fancy, right? Now that I've been a part of the hiring event, I understand what was happening behind the scenes. They're deciding who should stay and go. And I did go to a face-to-face interview. I didn't talk about that. I did sit down with two people. One is from HR. The other person was a flight attendant. And that's when I went to the waiting room afterwards, the decision room. And they called 8 people's names or numbers, and they all walked out of the room. And then we wait, and they call 8 other people's numbers, and they would all leave the room. And they finally called my number, and I saw the people they were calling as well, the other people in my little group, and I was like, oh, she was awesome. I got the job offer. And then I saw them choose somebody else, and I was like, oh, no, he's wearing Skechers. Kidding. But like, no, he wasn't, I don't think he was like going to be a winner, no. So maybe I didn't get that. It was awful. We went downstairs. They walked us right to the front door of the hotel. And the young lady said, well, we want to thank you very much for, taking the time. We understand that you invested some time and energy in this, and we're really grateful for that. And we want to apologize and say that, unfortunately, you're going to have to spend the next 4 weeks with us. Nah. And we are, a mixture of us, we're all like in shock because, and then we started to cry. Of course, many of us were like, when we realized that we had received a job offer or a contingent job offer, because that just means you have to pass training to actually get the official offer. But then the next, I don't even know, 3 or 4 hours was spent doing drug testing and fingerprinting and background checks, and it was just thoroughly exhausting. One day, I hope that they make this event into a 2-day event again, because it used to be. Because for one day, it's a lot. It was a lot before I became a flight attendant. Now it would just be every other normal day. It was a 14-hour long interview. And for those 14 hours, you have to be on your toes, smiling the whole time, staying away from your cell phone, kind of like being a flight attendant. Now, today it would be a no-brainer because many of our duty days are 12, 13, 14, 15, up to 16 hours long. So no big whoop these days. But that's how I received my job, I should say my invitation to training. That was on January 10th. I think I was able to choose in order my top 3 choices for my bases. I chose my first as being Fort Lauderdale, because I was already living in Tampa-ish, around Tampa, and I kind of liked it. My next one was Vegas because it didn't have snow, because I have become allergic to living where you have to shovel the sidewalk. And then my third choice was Chicago because I do love living in a city, in a real city, and I thought Chicago would be a good fit for me. So they only offered, I think, 7 people positions in Fort Lauderdale during that hiring event. Of course, the next one, there were like 80 people going to Fort Lauderdale, but whatever, I got Vegas, and I'm so glad I did, because Vegas was very good for me. I could afford to live in Vegas. It's a much cheaper place to live than Fort Lauderdale, so I didn't struggle as much as I would have had I gotten Fort Lauderdale for training, or for a base. So my training started on March 1st, and I am so grateful that I had that time because, many of the people, my classmates, were very, very young, just out of school, probably just a couple of years. It had been 30 years since I'd taken a test. I mean, 30. So I was not in the practice of studying for tests, preparing for tests, taking tests. I was very, very stressed and very afraid. I think a day or two later, we received an email which had our base assignments, Vegas. It also had a boatload of attachments that we actually had to memorize before training, and that's schematics. And I have a video on schematics if you are joining my airline. Schematics, military time, terms and abbreviations, city codes. We had to learn a whole bunch of stuff before we even showed up for training. And I just thank goodness that I had, 5 or 6 weeks to prepare. What I did is I ended up going back down to Tampa, and I was actually living in my minivan. Because I was already down there. I was living in my minivan, and I was actually staying at a friend's house, and I had stuff kind of stored at a couple different places. So the first 3 weeks between the hiring event and my first day of training, the first 3 weeks, I was still down in Tampa, and I had to face my fear of flying. Now, I wasn't afraid to fly, but any sense of turbulence, I was holding onto the armrest with like a death grip, tears, and praying to a woman I don't believe in. I just was a very nervous flyer. And so I figured, since I'm already in Florida, around Tampa, I got a membership or a pass, an annual pass to Busch Gardens in Tampa. And you ask why? Because they have roller coasters. I had not been on a roller coaster since June of 1977. I had not been on a roller coaster, and they've changed a little bit since then. So I had to get past my fear of being out of control, being flung around, being, turbulence, basically. So I started taking, I spent like 3 weeks at Busch Gardens every day riding roller coasters. I started with Cheetah Hunt, then I graduated up to Kumba, and then I graduated up to Montu, and I just started riding those roller coasters over and over again. And up till I could be up in the front seat, and then to a point where I would sit in the front seat giggling with my hands up in the air, having the best time of my life. And so that's how I got past my fear of flying, and my fear of turbulence and being out of control, and my fear of not trusting the machine, So, because, I'm on a roller coaster thinking this thing's going to snap and we're going to go flying, and, just all sorts of fears. But doing it over and over and over again really helped me get past my anxiety of turbulence. And so the last 3 weeks before training, I drove up to Atlanta in a rental car. It was a Ford Fusion, which I fell in love with, because if you know my story, I didn't tell you this. I might as well mention it now. I know I'm going back and forth. After the hiring event, I was driving back up to Tampa. My car died. My home died. The transmission just collapsed. It died, like, spectacularly. I was in a place called Moorville. You can Google it. Moorville. It's right below Lake Okeechobee in Florida. So I was halfway between Fort Lauderdale and Tampa. My friend's mother, my friend Melanie, thank God for Melanie, her mother drove from St. Pete, actually Dunedin, to Moorville to pick me up. And I drove back the next day in a rental car, found someone to trash that car, and long story. But I stayed with friends for a little bit in Tampa, as I told you, for the first 3 weeks. Then I got a little rental car, that little Ford Fusion I fell in love with, and drove up to Atlanta. And I spent the next 3 weeks in Atlanta studying city codes and terminology and all that stuff. And in a safe place where I didn't have to worry about food, I didn't have to worry about a roof over my head, and there were friends nearby. So those 3 weeks I dedicated to memorizing everything I had to memorize for training. And then February 28th, I flew down to Fort Lauderdale and went to training. And yeah, I'm fighting back tears right now just thinking about that whole experience. Training was something else. I don't think I've ever been through a more stressful time ever that was as satisfying as that was. Well, no, early sobriety. Early sobriety was about as stressful and as rewarding as that. But training as a flight attendant is amazing. It's horrifying, it's stressful, it's terrifying, it's fun, it's exciting, and you're with amazing people and building relationships that you'll just have for the rest of your life. If you're a flight attendant, you know how it, you know what it's like, right? It's the best experience. It really is. And then that was it. I flew to Vegas after my OE, and I was a flight attendant. I started flying. My first trip was on April 1st, April 2nd, I think. And it was a red eye to Baltimore. I deadheaded the way back. That was it. But whew, there I have been talking for almost 27 minutes about this whole thing. But I wanted to share a little story time with you guys about January 10th and what a magic day it is for me. As usual, express my gratitude not only for the job, but for my company, because I adore my airline. We get a lot of flack from a lot of places for not being, Delta, but I adore my airline. I work with the best people, and it's afforded me a life that I just never, ever, ever dreamed was possible for me. So, and it introduced me to you guys. Win, 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 right? So now that I've been talking for so long, I knew it would be a long video. I want to say thank you for watching. Feel free to drop any questions below. I was talking to my friend Danny the other day, and he said he really enjoyed my question and answer video. So if you have any questions that have been brought up by this little story time, certainly drop them below. I'll try and add those to a future question and answer video. And what do you think about my little goatee? Is it too 90s? Somehow from the front, it makes me look thinner, I think. But then I turn sideways, and it's like, what? Oh, God. But I miss having facial hair. I really miss having facial hair. And my mask fits right over it fairly securely. So I can still have this and still wear a mask and feel, protected to a degree. And then after all this is over, hopefully soon, I can kind of grow this in, because I do miss having a full beard, but blah, blah, blah. Thanks for watching, and I will let you go. I'll see you later. Bye. Fly safe.